Next on KQED Newsroom, more Bay Bridge woes. A Sacramento Bee investigation reveals corrosion in a critical part of the new eastern span. Silicon Valley companies make record profits, triggering cheers, but a downturn in tech stocks causes alarm. And the science of bringing back extinct species.
And so to go back to that original mistake or crime and try to undo it, there might be some redemption in that.
Good evening and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. Elected officials are calling for an independent examination of corrosion in critical parts of the new eastern span of the Bay Bridge. A recent investigation by the Sacramento Bee found rust inside a crucial chamber meant to protect the suspension cables from moisture and corrosion. Some engineering experts are warning if the rust gets worse, it could lead to structural damage. This is the latest in a string of concerns about the bridge, including weld defects and broken bolts and rods. Sacramento Bee reporter Charles Pillar broke the story. He spoke earlier with Scott Shafer.
Charles Pillar, welcome.
Thank you.
First, get us up to speed here on exactly where the problem with this bridge, the current problem, is.
The problem is inside chambers where the main cable of the span is attached to the bridge itself. These chambers are located on the eastern side of the suspension span portion of the bridge, and viewers might recall that this is a very unusual bridge. It's held up by one single cable that wraps under the western side of the bridge and attaches to the bridge itself in chambers on the east side.
And you had a chance to go inside the chamber, which is supposed to be dry to protect the cable. What did you see?
What we saw was somewhat surprising and disturbing. Very obvious signs of corrosion in several locations, including on the strands of the main cable themselves, on the sockets, the devices that they attach to inside these chambers, and on the anchor rods, which are the high-strength steel rods that connect the main cable to the bridge.
These are all critical components.
These are critical components that are integral to the structural stability of the span. If they are damaged or have problems or experience corrosion-related cracking, that is a serious structural problem.
And when you say you saw rust, it was like orangish kind of rust that we would see on metal?
Yeah, we saw rust that was self-evidently rust, like steel rust you see on any sort of steel object that's been exposed to water. And the problem is that for a layperson, you can't definitively know what you're seeing. So what we did is we took samples of the corrosion residue and had them tested in a very sophisticated laboratory, private laboratory.
Them being independent investigators.
Independent investigators. We had these samples tested and they showed definitively not only steel rust, but I think quite significantly the presence of salt in those samples. What that means is that not only water reached those strands and anchor rods, but also salt from the bay environment. That's important because salt is an accelerant for corrosion.
And was the exposure, did it occur during the construction or is it ongoing? Is it still happening?
The answer to that is both. So construction errors and I think missteps by Caltrans and the builders of the bridge led to this problem. First of all, the chambers where these strands of the main cable, anchor rods, and the connectors between them are located. Those were open to the environment for a year during construction. So they experienced 21 inches of rain, bay mist, humid air from the marine environment for a full year. After that, the chambers were sealed and supposedly dehumidified, but unfortunately, the efforts to seal and dehumidify those chambers failed. Water collects in the chambers and the humidity is not controlled.
So does Caltrans say at this point that there's not rust, that it's really just zinc oxide, which is supposed to kind of corrode because to protect the metal? Or do they say, well, there's rust, but it's not a problem? Or like, what's their attitude about it? Are they in denial, I guess?
Well, they say they're not in denial, and I credit them with that. Unfortunately, what they've said so far is they're attributing the rust to particles of steel that were ground from the deck portions of those chambers and then found their way onto the strands and to the anchor rods. We've definitively shown that that can't possibly be true because the characteristics of those particles are very different from the vast majority of the rust particles we found in laboratory testing. It's extremely obvious what the differences are. Now, I think what the next obvious step is for them to have an independent examination, much more thorough than we were able to do, to see the extent of the problem.
You drive over this bridge all the time. You drove over it today to come here. What goes through your mind when you cross that bridge?
Well, I feel like a lucky person. I don't think I'm going to be on that bridge when the big one hits. That said, in all seriousness, I don't think that bridge is in danger of falling down anytime soon. But what we're talking about is a series of potentially significant structural defects and doubts, uncertainties that haven't been well examined yet by Caltrans or its advisors. Until those defects and those uncertainties are examined carefully and some work is put in to see whether remediation might be necessary, I think everyone in the Bay Area should take the stability of that structure, that $6.5 billion bridge, with some reservation and concern.
And the concern, of course, we may not know for sure until that big one hits.
True enough, but what we do know is that visible rust and corrosion on these critical areas can be examined and can be fixed if it is serious.
All right, Charles Pillar from the Sacramento Bee, thank you so much.
Thank you, Scott.
It's corporate earnings season and the spotlight is on Silicon Valley companies. This week, a number of them released revenue figures. Yahoo and Intel are among those that beat Wall Street expectations, while others, including Google, fell short, contributing to a decline for tech stocks. Still, the top Silicon Valley technology companies produced record profits last year. The last time we saw anything like it was in 1999, right before the tech bubble burst. Is this another bubble in the making or not? Joining me now for analysis are Jeremy Owens, online business editor for the San Jose Mercury News, and Stephen Wright, Senior Vice President at the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. Welcome to you both. Jeremy, beginning with you, overall, how have Silicon Valley's largest companies been doing over the past year?
Well, we just compiled our annual list of the SV150, which is the 150 largest technology companies in terms of revenues. And as you said, we found record profits. In terms of market capitalization, it reached as high as it has since the '99 bubble. So we're seeing the strongest Silicon Valley technology sector since the bubble burst in 2000 from what we've seen. And it's just a different technology sector at this point, but a robust one.
And so you bring up the bubble. Are we seeing early signs of a bubble with the really high company valuations, the increased traffic, right, the soaring rents and housing prices?
Well, you know, and some people would say once again, we also have the big delivery movement. Remember, Webvan was one of the big ones that went down in the late 90s. And now we have grocery delivery and we have all the things that didn't seem to really have a business model coming back. So there are some of the things that are similar now compared to the 90s. However, I think we're way far away from any kind of a bubble. If anything, we might start seeing some market corrections in terms of investment by venture capitalists and where they move their money to. But we're far away, I think, from a bubble. Despite the traffic, despite the housing prices, it's still a pretty robust economy. And it's still not hitting everyone, as you know. There's still 6% unemployment, so there's a lot still that's different from what it was in the 90s.
There's been a month-long downturn for some of the biggest names, Facebook, Twitter, Yelp, Netflix. Is this a blip or is it symptomatic perhaps of something longer and wider?
Well, I think what Steve said in correction is probably the best way to put it. There was a little bit of a correction happening with some of the momentum stocks from 2013. But I think what you're seeing here is the fact that we're not in a bubble because other companies went up. If you look at the standard bearers of the Valley for the last 20 years, HP, Intel, Oracle, Cisco, those companies actually went up in the past month and a half, while you saw Facebook and Netflix and all these other companies fall back down by 10, 20, even 30 or 40% if you look at Pandora and some others. So you're seeing a more diversified Valley in terms of maturity, in terms of the different sectors and what they offer. While you're seeing companies in the web sector and the clean tech sector get valued very highly because they're betting on those companies to continue growing and to do well into the future. Other companies that are more established, they know what they're getting with that investment, and those companies are not going to be as affected. So when you look at the bubble that burst in 2000, that affected valley-wide across all different sectors. While at this point, it doesn't look like if there's going to be a bubble burst, it's going to be very specific to specific companies.
And I would also add that, you know, if you think of startup businesses as small businesses, they really employ a lot of people, but in small little places. Venture capitalists are still very bullish on the startup scene. The reports are just out today. About 50% of the venture capital money in the United States was spent right here in Silicon Valley. There's still a lot of startup activity, a lot of really smart people working on tough problems, both with technology and services, and the VCs are willing to gamble a little bit.
So we've got all this VC money pouring in, and we've got companies making record profits. Why is the unemployment rate still at 6%? It has improved somewhat, but if you look back at '99, for example, it was hovering around 2%. Why are we not seeing more jobs created by the companies?
Well, a lot of that money right now especially is being saved in bank accounts, pushed back to investors. We found that Silicon Valley's top 150 companies pushed back more to investors this year than they ever have in the past, twice as much actually than they ever have in the past. And they have 1/3 of all of the cash in bank accounts for all of corporate America. And a lot of that's saved overseas. But in the comeback from the recession, you might see people hold on to their cash a little bit more and look to reward investors that stuck with them through that. So the hope is that that money starts flowing more into jobs and research and development and capital reinvestment now. We had a 3.1% employee advance in the SV150 in 2013, which is actually down from 2012, and you would expect to see that grow this year.
Steve, do you think the company should be hiring more people? Your group, Silicon Valley Leadership Group,
right,
is a public policy trade group representing more than 400 companies in Silicon Valley. Should they be hiring more?
Well, I think if you look back to the late 90s, a lot of these companies and the VCs that came out of those companies really remember the sting of that era. And so the companies are holding on to money before doing the kind of expansion that one might like to see to bring about larger employment. There's also a much different skills gap these days than there was even 10, 15 years ago. The rapid rate of the change of technology is so fast that it's hard for a lot of workers to keep up. So some of the unemployed are just out of the skill. Their skill is no longer needed. And so we're really trying to work harder in Silicon Valley to think about how can we anticipate a little bit better where technology is moving, and how can we get more people trained, and also make sure our universities and even our elementary and secondary schools are getting students to think more about technology jobs. That will help with employment over the long haul.
So that's the long-term educational mission. But what about in the short term? Is the economic prosperity we're starting to see trickling down and out to those not in the tech sector?
Well, I think there's pretty substantial anecdotal evidence that restaurants are doing better, that small businesses from dry cleaners to bigger businesses like car dealerships are doing better. Some people are spending money, but a lot of people are still sitting on their cash. But it's beginning to loosen up, and I think you can see it in neighborhoods, around the Bay Area. So I think it's going to be okay for the next year or two, and I think any kind of words about a major correction or a real problem, we won't know about for another 3 years probably.
And I think a lot of companies want to see the trailing 4 quarters, trailing 6 quarters really come up. You know, we're still, if you look back 1, 2, 3 years, you still see a lot of problems stemming from the Great Recession. And as we get farther and farther away from that, and companies and CEOs are able to look back and say, well, now we've been able to sustain this level of growth and profitability for the past year, 2 years, 3 years, there will be a little bit more satisfaction with the business to go ahead and hire more. And that's what you hope for. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So going back to where we started this discussion then, your Silicon Valley 150 list, what are some of the hottest sectors now and what's starting to cool off?
Well, the web sector and the clean tech sector had huge growth last year. The clean tech sector, thanks to Elon Musk, basically. Tesla and Solar City were our 2 largest market value gainers in terms of their stock value. And they also had huge revenue growth and huge workforce growth. So they were hiring people. The web sector was similar. We added Twitter to our web sector along with Facebook and Google, and those are some of our biggest growing companies. So, but those are also two of our smallest sectors. You know, the web sector has about 10 to 12, I believe, companies in it. Clean tech is only 4. And so you see startups in those areas that aren't on the SV150 yet, that are too young and aren't big enough. But that's where you see a lot of the growth. Mm-hmm.
And when you mentioned Tesla, it's got a lot of growth, but another area that it plans to grow in is building this battery plant. It could provide a lot of jobs. And yet it says it's not going to move here to California. Are we creating some situations here where regulatory impediments are preventing that sector?
Well, I think just about any business person in California would say it's a little behind the times when it comes to what other states are doing to try to get companies to move their manufacturing there. Other states will give tax benefits and will really work hard to get those jobs and that kind of business. But California is still far behind.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there.
Okay.
All right, Jeremy Owens and Steve Wright, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now a story that seems lifted from science fiction. Researchers, many here in California, are trying to bring back extinct species. Everything from the woolly mammoth to the passenger pigeon, which was once the most abundant bird in the world. Bringing species back might be a way to correct past mistakes and even to help endangered animals. But just because we can, should we? Be right back.
Sarah, no!
The clone dinosaurs of the Jurassic Park movies captured viewers' imaginations. But 65 million years after their extinction, there's no chance scientists can bring dinosaurs back, says University of California, Santa Cruz biologist Beth Shapiro.
Jurassic Park is a fantasy and always will be. Dinosaurs are way too old to think that we're going to be able to recover genetic material.
Instead, scientists are focusing on species that went extinct more recently. Researchers have already revived one extinct animal. The last of a type of mountain goat was cloned in Spain in 2003. But the clone only lived a few minutes. Here in the U.S., George Church from Harvard Medical School is engineering elephant cells with thicker hair and a fatty layer to make them more like woolly mammoths. His hope is that these new mammoths could help keep the Arctic from melting. Scientists believe that grazing by herbivores like mammoths strengthened the grass that grew on top of the permafrost and protected it from the sun.
The mammoths may have had a big role in maintaining the grass that stabilized the ice, which contains more carbon in it, as in global warming carbon, than all of the rainforests put together ×2.
The same genetic engineering technology could one day make it possible to bring back other extinct animals. At UC Santa Cruz, 27-year-old Ben Novak is working to de-extinct the passenger pigeon.
In the early 1800s, there were 5 billion of these birds, just in the United States. Within the span of about 50 years, they go extinct.
Not to be confused with domesticated carrier pigeons, passenger pigeons were wild birds that migrated through the eastern and central U.S. and Canada.
You had these giant flocks of birds, so dense that with a single shot you could take down dozens of them.
Shipped by the trainloads to feed hungry cities, the passenger pigeon went extinct in 1914. Novak plans to genetically engineer its closest relative, the band-tailed pigeon. He would insert genes he obtained from passenger pigeon museum specimens. These genes would, for example, replace band-tailed pigeon square tails with the long tail and swift wings that allowed passenger pigeons to fly at 60 miles per hour.
Hey, Ben. Hey, how you doing?
Ryan Phelan and Stuart Brand's nonprofit, Revive and Restore in Sausalito, is funding Novak's work.
Have you seen this cool thing?
Brand is best known for his Whole Earth catalog. Started in 1968, it encouraged readers to live in tune with nature. Today, Brand hopes to excite a new generation.
Do you want extinct species back? Do you want extinct species back? Go back to that original mistake or crime and try to undo it. There might be some redemption in that.
That, to me, is the wrong attitude.
Biologist Jim Patton at the University of California, Berkeley doesn't share Brand's enthusiasm.
We're lost unless we realize that we're just a part of this intricate web. And we ought to bring species back if they can help maintain that web, but not because it makes us feel better and sleep better at night.
Phelan and Brand estimate it'll take $5 to $50 million to bring back the passenger pigeon.
Where the money tends to be coming in is from people in high tech. They like being on cutting edges, and this is one.
Brand believes passenger pigeons could help restore the East Coast forests by spreading seeds around. But the pigeons could end up in conflicts with humans once again, especially if they were listed under the Endangered Species Act.
If it's an endangered species, then all of a sudden, all of the forest habitat where it goes into will be off limits to hunting and hiking and biking.
Will the people in the East Coast be willing to put up with thousands of pigeons defecating all over everything?
The enterprise of reviving disappeared species is driven at least in part by the increasing extinction rate that scientists have observed in the past 500 years. At San Francisco's California Academy of Sciences, biologist Jack Dumbacher guards the remnants of extinct animals.
There are actually only two keys to this case. I have one and the collection manager has the other. Humans are the reason why species are going extinct at a higher rate. Human population sizes are so big that we're having a huge impact, destroying habitat and converting habitat from its natural form into agriculture, to cities, to other things that we use.
Climate change is making things worse by turning the oceans inhospitable to coral reefs, for example. Some scientists estimate that if temperatures continue to climb, they could contribute to the disappearance of half the world's species.
If you've got some ecosystem that we know is collapsing because we've lost some key ecosystem component and we can de-extinct it, why wouldn't we do that?
But many biologists believe that efforts should focus on endangered rather than extinct species.
It comes down hugely to priorities. If we have these technologies and these technologies can be brought to bear to help preserve what is already here, that's where I would put my resources.
At the San Diego Zoo Safari Park, Nola and Angie are two of only 7 northern white rhinos left in the world. Poached for their horns, the rhinos are believed to have disappeared in the wild around 2006. At 40, the park's 2 rhinos have ended their baby-making years, and it's also unlikely that the other 5 will reproduce either, says zoo geneticist Oliver Ryder.
Without some extraordinary intervention, northern white rhinos are doomed.
Those extraordinary measures begin with rhino cells stored at -250 degrees at the San Diego Zoo's Frozen Zoo. Scientists have collected cells from 12 northern white rhinos. Using stem cell techniques and in vitro fertilization, they hope to increase the rhino population and its genetic diversity. The Frozen Zoo holds the cells of 1,000 different species, many of them endangered. With new technologies, these cells could one day become a lifeline.
That report was produced by Gabriela Quiros of KQED Science. You can learn more about how California scientists are trying to bring back long-gone animals. The half-hour documentary Reawakening Extinct Species airs April 23rd at 7:30 p.m. here on KQED. And joining me now for a look at other stories we're watching is Scott Shafer. Hi, Scott.
Hi, Twee.
All right, Governor Brown is calling for a special session of the legislature next week. He wants them to pass a November ballot measure for a rainy day fund. There's already something similar to that on the ballot. Why does he want another one?
Well, the one that's on the ballot in November was part of a deal in 2010 when Schwarzenegger was governor, and the Republicans would only vote for the budget if they got this thing on the ballot. Democrats have never liked it. Public employee unions don't like it. They think it's too much of a lockbox, that the money won't be accessible when they want to spend more. And so Governor Brown wants to tweak it and change a few things, negotiate with the Republicans over the details, and put it on the ballot instead of the one that's on there now.
Okay, and how would this one be different?
Well, Governor Brown wants to focus on a couple things. One, capital gains. That's the part of the revenue stream that's so volatile. It goes up and down sort of crazy in a crazy way. He wants to smooth that out, skim off some of that money, put it in this reserve fund. And then the legislature and the governor can decide if they want to spend it on debt or if they want to spend it on things like pension funds. You know, they can make that decision, but he wants to set it aside automatically when it's available.
And he needs 2/3 of the votes to do this. And the Democrats don't have a supermajority anymore now that 3 state senators have been suspended, including Leland Yee. So how is he going to get this done?
Well, he's got to talk to Republicans, and he started doing that, talking with the leadership. They seem open to it. They don't have to do anything, because if they do nothing, the one that's on the ballot now will stay. But they have some incentive to negotiate with him. So they'll probably want some more guarantees that that money can't just be raided every time the Democrats want to spend more of it.
Okay, and the governor's also making headlines with something else. On this Good Friday, he announced he's granted 63 pardons to people once convicted of various crimes. Is there a pattern to the pardons he granted? Yeah, they're mostly crimes that happened a long time ago in the 60s and 70s, nonviolent crimes. Most of them are drug offenses. These are all people who served their time, got out of prison, and have been, on the right side of the law ever since. They have to apply for a pardon, and the governor has granted these 63 right before Easter. Is this something all governors do, or is this something pretty specific to Jerry Brown? Well, all governors have the right and the power to do pardons. Gray Davis issued 0 when he was governor. Arnold Schwarzenegger gave out about a dozen. This governor has given out 400 now over the first, not yet 4 years of his first term this time as governor. And so clearly he is a believer in second chances, kind of like the voters have given him with being governor a second time. And also he was trained in the seminary, so there's a lot of religious basis to what he's doing here. Absolutely, and I think that's why he ties it to Christmas and to Easter. All right, thanks, Scott. You bet. And we leave you tonight with a special sneak preview of an exhibit opening soon. During the Civil War, photographer Carlton Watkins braved the elements to photograph Yosemite, packing in 1 ton of equipment on mules. His photographs inspired President Lincoln and Congress to make the valley a national preserve. An exhibition of the original photos opens April 23rd at the Cantor Art Center at Stanford University. I'm Scott Shafer. Thanks for joining us. And I'm Thuy Vu. Have a good night.